Let's start with the basics of Kurukshetra this time. It focuses on sustainable and inclusive rural growth. So, sustainable growth, what does it mean? It means utilizing the resources in such a fashion that those resources are available for our future generations to come. Now, this is what we call as a judicious use of resource so that there is a perfect trade off between the present and the future generation. Now, under sustainable development, there are three important components that we need to understand. First is we focus on the economic growth, the second is social inclusion, and the third is environmental protection. So, all of these three elements must go hand in hand in order to have a sustainable development. Now, agriculture has been one of the major areas where we focus on strengthening the infrastructure of the agriculture, better irrigation, better warehousing, better cold storage, so that there is a good linkage which can be established between the farm and the non-farm sector, and as a result more jobs can be created in the rural area. The next is inclusive rural growth. Now when we say India is the fifth largest economy of the world, we have a net worth of $2.94 trillion, but our idea is to have a $5 trillion economy by 2025. So we have $1 trillion from agriculture, $3 trillion from services, and $1 trillion from manufacturing. Now, rural India generates half of the total national income and two-thirds of the total national employment. Along with agriculture, the other important sectors in the rural area are FMCGs, that is the fast-moving consumer goods, the goods that are used on a daily basis, the consumer durables, banking, and MSMEs, that is the medium and the small-scale enterprises. Now, what we need to understand is how the development can be streamlined. So, market linkage becomes very important. For example, in the case of agriculture, we have seen three new farm laws. One of that focuses on the better pricing that a farmer gets. So, removing the law that allows farmer to sell only to the APMCs. Now the farmer has a choice to sell in the open market. The next law focuses on removing the major agricultural commodities from the list of essential commodities and attract FDI for the same. Along with that, Sampada scheme is a major scheme that talks about agro-marine processing and development of agro-processing clusters. Along with this, within this Sampada scheme, there are many mega food parks that have been established in India. 37 food parks have been sanctioned so far, 21 of which are already operational, mainly in the rural areas, and they address the needs of the small and the micro food processing enterprise. There is another novel concept which is ODOP, which is one district, one product. This talks about an indigenous special product. It could be perishable, it could be cereal based, it could be a food product that is unique to that district. The product would be tied to that district and sold in the open market. MSMEs contribute to 30% of the national GDP, and what are the definitions of MSP is important to understand. Now, micro enterprise is an enterprise which have an investment of less than 1 crore and turnover of less than 5 crore. A small enterprise has an investment of less than 10 crores and a turnover of less than 50 crores, and then we have a medium enterprise with an investment of less than 50 crores and a turnover of less than 250 crores. So those are the definitions, and then we have the Udyam registration which offers numerous benefits. So the payment for the invoice is assured within 45 days. The buyer is liable to pay the compound interest. Then we have the mandated procedure of 25% requirement from the registered MSMEs. We also get benefit for the collaterals, and then there are concessions in the electricity bills as well. As we said, FMCG is one of the major sectors which is a fast moving consumer durables. India is fourth largest sector. Within India, this is the fourth largest sector and employs nearly 3 million people in FMCGs. Of the FMCG, if we try to bifurcate it, nearly 50% of it is with the personal care and household products, 31% with food and beverage, and around 19% with healthcare facilities. 100% foreign direct investment has been allowed in single brand retail and 51% in multi brand retail, which is another important section. And the consumer durables have been divided into brown goods and white goods. Brown goods include the TVs, laptops, digital cameras. White goods include washing machines, microwaves. So these are the two broad categories which influence the rural economy and the rural market. Now coming back to agriculture, as we said, agriculture has reached a GDP of nearly 20%, which is remarkable in itself. India has one of the largest livestock population. Nearly 31% of the world livestock population resides in India. Milk production has significantly increased tenfolds, 10% in the year-to-year growth that we have registered. And also, now with the Kisan Rail, we are trying to connect the remote areas and the perishable goods to the city centers, and this creates in more demand and more supply chain to be strengthened and more revenue opportunities for the small scale farmers. The next is rural entrepreneurs. Now what are entrepreneurs? Entrepreneurs are basically people who undertake moderate risk with an idea to earn profit from certain activity. Now rural entrepreneurs can be mainly either farm based, they could be non farm based, they can have work associated with trading, with tribal activities. The word itself is in French origin, and the idea is to increase employment, to have check on the rural migrations to the urban areas, and this would in turn bring in a balanced regional growth, and there won't be clustering in the urban city centers. It would reduce the inequality and lead to better community and the better quality of life. However, there are numerous opportunities which lie in the rural areas and is unexplored. First is cheap labor, availability of raw material, low cost to establish concepts, lot of subsidies which are given by the government, reduced cost bearing in terms of promotional cost, and more support which can lead to better employment opportunities and better job opportunities. If we talk about the entrepreneurs, we have Uttar Pradesh with highest number of enterprises, followed by West Bengal in India so far, and most of the registered enterprises we can see which involve female associates are from Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, and more of women empowerment has been seen across. So there are three pillars that we say for increasing the number of women entrepreneurs, and those are Ichha Shakti, Gyan Shakti and Karma Shakti. As the name suggests, Ichha Shakti is a motivating factor, Gyan Shakti focuses on knowledge, and Karma Shakti focuses on setting up and scaling up the business. Now, yoga has been one of the topics of discussion which we have already covered in the Yojana edition for June this time. This also has a coverage here again. So, just covering the points that have not been covered. The concept of Ashtang Yoga, the 8 limbs of the yoga have already been covered. Besides that, this edition covers the 4 pillars of yoga, which is the Ahar, a good diet, Vihar, that means a good recreation, Achar, which includes exercises, and Vichar, which means the right thought. Besides this, the yoga therapy includes various doctrines. For example, the Ashtang Yoga of Patanjali, which we already discussed, the concept of Panchakosh, which we would understand in a while, which is laid down in the Upanishad. Then it talks about Shuddhi and Hatha Yoga, and also talks about the Nadi Shuddhi, the Vayu and the Pran, and focusing on the Karma, Gyan and Bhakti, which is the basis of Bhagavad Gita. Some of them also mentions about the Tantra Yoga, which is an integrated yogic practice in certain cases. Now, Hatha Yoga, as we said, is an activity which involves body, mind and energy, and it is an awakening force which includes bringing of human consciousness and facilitating the flow of pran. Now, Panchakosh, as we said, is part of Upanishad. So, under Panchakosh, we have the various kosh, the 5 existence. So, as the name suggests, Panch, so it is amalgamation of 5 aspects of our existence. The first is Anmay Kosh. Anmay is the atomic level or the anatomical level of our existence. So, the Sukshma and the smallest form that exists exist. So Sukshma Vyayam, then we say Kriya and Asan are all important along with it. Then we have the Pranayam Kosh. Pranayam Kosh is the physiological existence. So the Anmay Kosh was the anatomical, the biological existence, we could say. Pranayam is the physiological existence, which talks about the working. So breathing awareness, breathe movements, or breathing coordination is part of it. The next is the Manomaya Kosh. The Manomaya Kosh focuses on psychological level. So it talks about concentration, focus, consciousness, jap, jap. So all those are part of the Manomaya Kosh. The next is Vishnamaya Kosh, which focuses on intellectual level, and it talks about satsang, swadhyay, self-analysis, and understanding and concentration practices that increases or brings in spiritual upliftment. And the last is Anandamaya Kosh, which talks about universal level of existence, and it basically implements all the principles of action in a relaxed form and brings in a blissful life. So it's a kind of overall view, or the Anandamaya Kosh as it is called as. Now, the Kriya Kosh has three important elements. The first is Tap, which is purifying the senses. The next is Swadhyay, self-analysis. And the next is Ishwar Paridhan, which is talking about the devotion which emerges from the creative source. And India has been recognized as one of the countries which has been leading down the idea of yoga across the globe, and therefore we have the International Yoga Day that is celebrated. Now, sustainable development goals have been important. Rural India has been lined with the 4 P's out of the 5 P policy agenda, and those 4 P's are people, planet, prosperity and peace. Now, in our separate class on sustainable development goals, we have talked about the sustainable development goals as well as the millennium development goals. This table which has been given by the MIHAI talks about the threat levels and the rural areas, how these needs to be done. And there are 3F concept. The 3F concept is tackling with the funds, the functions and the functionaries in order to have the best operation that can be seen. The next is Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gramin Kaushal Yojana. It talks about generating employment opportunity within the rural youth, and this is in the age group of 15 to 35 years. Nearly 69% of those reside in the rural area. So how those objectives can be fulfilled has been important. Then we have the data and the statistics from International Labor Organization that estimates that female employment in agriculture was 57% in 2018 as compared to 19% in industries and 24% in services. That means a significantly higher proportion of employment, female employment, is seen in agriculture and allied activities, and 93% of the young men and women working in the rural areas are engaged in informal sector like agriculture. So a significant proportion is engaged in informal sector. We have nearly 51% of the women that constitutes the total employment in the forest based activities. For example, in Odisha, men go and collect the baskets for the grass for basket making, and women actually sew the baskets and sell those. So there is a kind of joint ownership which is seen for most of the activities, and therefore employment needs to be given a thrust, and it's not just the kind of integration but training facilities that need to be brought into account, and a better demand supply ratio has to be established in order to proceed this further. Now, the national education policy, we are already in line with the new national education policy 2020. Our series of 6 lectures have already covered the details of the new education policy, so you can refer that for details. But the idea is, when the idea of centrally sponsored scheme for restructuring and reorganizing teachers education, CSSTE, was launched and initiated in 1987, the idea was based with the national policy on education. However, later we moved to Samragya Shiksha, which subsumed all these schemes, including the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan as well as the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan for the lower primary level as well as the middle level. Also, we have seen the gross enrollment ratio for boys and girls in the SC/ST categories have significantly improved, but is still higher at the elementary level and starts declining as the students move towards the secondary and the higher secondary level. 85% of the child's brain development occurs before the age of 6, and therefore under the new education policy the basic idea is to focus on the early stages of life, the age below 6 years. So development and enhancement of Anganwadis have been recommended. Similarly, by the age child moves into a grade 3, the child should have the basic skills of reading, writing and basic mathematics. This would help the child to solve the future complex problems in much smoother way. So the mission here focuses on five separate pillars, and those are focusing on, first of all, the foundational years of the child, basically the foundational years of schooling. How can teaching capacity be ramped up? Developing high quality resources, better learning material, and keeping a progress of the child's development across the various stages of life. So NIOS has been working in the open distance learning mode and has brought in numerous training programs even for the untrained in-service elementary school teachers. So those are some of the developments in the field of education. Coming on to mining. If we focus in India, the mining sector contributes a very meager percentage of only 1.69% of the country's total GDP. In contrast to this, in Australia, it accounts for 15% of the GDP and has nearly 1 million population who is enrolled as part of the idea of workforce in mining. And in Canada, this is around 3.6% of the GDP. So in India, the contribution of mining is very small. Of this 1.69%, 0.8% in India is accounted by mainly iron, bauxite and limestone, and the remaining ones are further at a lower stake. That means we need to understand what are the major mining sectors as of now in India. But when it comes in terms of reserves, in terms of production, India is 4th largest in reserve in coal, 7th largest reserves in manganese, 5th largest reserves in bauxite, and besides this also huge reserves of chromite, limestone, diamond, natural gas have been found in India. But still the value of imports are significantly lower, and therefore we say we have nearly 36% of the total value of merchandise which is imported in the country. So exports need to be ramped up. But what are the reasons? Now, as we said, mining is one of the major sectors. Of mining, nearly half of it goes to iron. But for iron, why there is low production? What are the reasons for it? One of the major reasons is the management plan for sustainable mining has brought about a complete ban on the mining in certain areas of Saranda and Chhaibasa forest, which lies in West Singhbhum area of Jharkhand. Now, this area is a reserve to 1.8 billion tons, which is now not available for mining. So one of the reasons for low mining production. The next is many of the mining sites have got the licenses, but the production has still not started. The new blocks have not been put into auction, or they have failed to get the licensing. Some of the captive iron ore mines are not into functioning, and even if they are into functioning, optimum utilization is not done. So for this iron ore issue, what have been the steps that have been taken? We all know that there are low output or low production that has been seen, the low mining that has been witnessed. So what are the steps? Government has taken numerous steps. For example, Section 8B has been brought into account as part of the mineral policy, and this accounts for a kind of statutory clearance from the earlier leases to the new ones, and this makes the process easier. Also, to allow captive miners to sell nearly 50% of their production is one of the ways to bring them more royalty. Also, fixing in a time frame in which the companies can obtain a licensing from the government and start the process of production should be defined. This would strengthen and streamline the process. A proper clause should be given by the government, and the restrictions on which areas the mining should be done, on which areas the clause for sustainable mining would be applicable, needs to be clearly embarked. So, what are the impacts of the changes that have already brought into account? Of these changes, we see now more private agencies coming into exploration. Block mines that were so far have now been opened, and also the captive mines optimally are given lease for selling the surplus mineral in the open market. So far, they were not allowed to sell in the open market. So, the idea is to make, first of all, mining, to increase the production of the mining, and secondly, make mining sustainable. Now, when we say make mining sustainable, that means reduce the term of the licensing from 30 years to 15 years with one time extension of 5 years, and all mineral blocks to be auctioned with pre-approval. This would be within a set period, making the evacuation of minerals to be done only using conveyor belts, and this would make the process much more streamlined. Zero waste mining should be an idea that should be brought into account at an immediate pace, because this should become a new norm and it should not be an exception anymore. So those are some of the important things that we need to understand with the mining in India, and how we have seen, despite of the good reserves that we have, the mining as proportion of GDP is significantly low. So what could be the steps that can be taken by the government? And not only that, how can sustainable mining be brought into picture? So those were some of the important things that we have discussed for today in Kurukshetra. We discuss Kurukshetra and Yojana every month, so stay tuned, stay subscribed for updates from our side. Have a wonderful day. Prepare well.